When I first went to my mum with the idea of this panel, I was not in the best of places over 18 months ago, and I felt like I just had a need to help people who were where I had been and who weren't comfortable going to school or to work because of how they'd been treated, and I just felt like speaking at Women in Media last year played a large part in getting me back on my feet. My mom stresses that this weekend is all about conversation, and until that day when I addressed a panel of people I admired and saw a room full of understanding faces, I never understood how impactful a conversation could be. Social media, whether we like it or not, it's crucial to most of us in our daily lives, but when you find yourself exposed to the bad side more so than the good side, it's important again to have a conversation. So before I pass you over to the very capable Ciara, I would like to conclude with a message of thanks on the final day of the 7th Annual Women in Media to my extraordinary mom, who I have imitated for my whole life. Since I was 9, every April I have met a host of amazing intellectual women who inspire me more than they can realise. But the woman who inspires me most of all is my mom. So thank you.
Thanks for bringing that for us. I think Brina is right in saying that social media does affect us all, and I want to get a show of hands of how many people are on social media. So Facebook, who's on Facebook? So that's practically everyone. Twitter, yeah, good amount. Instagram, YouTube. Okay, less with YouTube. But as you can see, look, we're all on it, and I don't want the conversation to be all social media is bad. You know, there's a lot of negatives about social media, but there's also a lot of positives, so I want that to come across. And also, I want this conversation to be quite interactive. So if you think of a question that you'd like to ask anybody here on the panel, including me, because I work in social media as well, just put up your hand and we'll try and get to everybody's questions. So you don't have to wait till the end, you can just put up your hand if you think of something. So I am going to now introduce our amazing panel. Some of these guests you could just talk for hours individually, so I'm very lucky to have you all here. Julia Ebner is a research fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue in London. You flew over to be with us. She's also the author of the best-selling book, The Rage, The Vicious Circle of Islamist and Far-Right Extremism. So thank you for being with us, Julia. Dr. Ciaran McMahon is the author of The Psychology of Social Media, which has just been published, is that right? That's right. Yeah, congratulations. He's also an information security consultant who specialises in cyber psychology of online organised crime. But your background is also in psychology, seeing you delving into areas as digital wellness and the popularity of social media. So thank you for joining us today. Some of you might recognise Aisling Riley. She is a celebrity gamer, is what I'd like to call her. You're a geologist by trade, but you're also on Twitch, which is a platform that streams live gaming, and you are a star on there. Aisling actually is based in the UK, but flew in for this as well, so thanks for joining us this morning. And I just realised our vote, and last but no means least, Jane Last. Jane is a formidable woman. She is the head of news for Independent News and Media. She oversees The Independent, Sunday Independent, Evening Herald, Sunderworld, Independent.ie. So Jane is very busy, and I'm sure having all these papers on social media makes you extra busy. Yeah. So welcome, Jane. So there's lots of areas to discuss, like social media and its impact on democracy, which we would have seen over elections across Ireland, Europe and the US. So we look at that, we look at our addiction to social media, if some of us would admit that we're addicted to it, and what effect it has on our brains. Also young people on these platforms, and cyberbullying, but also self-harm. And what are the platforms that you're doing to stop it, basically. The use of our data and whether we care with what they do with our data. News, I mean, I'm a news journalist, I work for BBC News on the social media team. So, you know, what impact, you know, news has for people on social media, and whether we should be on it at all, actually, is a question that's being asked at the moment. Algorithms, advertising and artificial intelligence it is artificial intelligence is the future. It's actually here now, and how is it going to affect us? And as I said, the positives of social media. So I don't want you going away going, I'm getting off Facebook and getting off Twitter and getting off Instagram, because there are positives. So we will discuss that. So I'm going to start with you, Julia. You've written lots of articles, and I actually came across you from your Guardian article. So when I was invited here, I was like, right, who do I want on my panel? And then I read your article in the Guardian about far-right extreme groups and elections across Europe. And I know that you were working on the New Zealand mosque attacks as well. So tell us more about, what you do, and what have you found actually, and how these organised groups operate on social media.
Yeah, thank you for your kind introduction. So I originally actually came from more the counter-terrorism, counter-extremism space, and started looking specifically at the use of social media and in general the online space by extremists for all kinds of tactics. So one would be the radicalization of sympathizers, but then also the manipulation of the mainstream, or what the far right calls the normies. And then the intimidation of all political opponents, such as journalists, for example, trustworthy media sources, but also political actors or activists. And in the last, I would say, probably 4 years, we've really seen a big evolution in the use of social media. And by social media, I would say, I'm not just speaking about the bigger social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the ones that you mentioned, but also some of the alternative social media and platforms that actually the far right and also Islamists have created for themselves, where they sometimes coordinate in those channels to then launch bigger operations on the mainstream channels.
What are those platforms called?
So those platforms, we call them, for example, dark social are the channels in encrypted apps where they would coordinate, for example, on Telegram. Especially ISIS has used Telegram a lot, but also the far right. They've also used the gaming app called Discord, especially the far right. And then also, of course, platforms that were more recently in the news because of the Pittsburgh shooter who was active on Gab, the kind of alt-right alternative for Twitter, which is mostly dominated by far-right extremists. But then also the platforms of 8chan and 4chan, where, for example, the Christchurch shooter was very active. And now we just had the breaking news, probably BBC broke it first on social media, last night, of the synagogue shooting close to San Diego, where the shooter was also active on 8chan. It was actually inspired by some of the previous the previous perpetrators who also came out of the same kind of internet culture space. And
Is it quite scary for you as a researcher to have to delve into the dark social and find out what's happening? Is that quite scary?
Definitely, because especially since the US election, I've spent a lot of time looking at at all of these platforms and looking at how individuals go from being sometimes completely apolitical, spending lots and lots of time there being indoctrinated, going all the way down, all the radicalization pathway down. And sometimes the lines get so blurry, though, between what's jokes and culture, or in culture, insider references and kind of the alt-right jokes, and what's real. And I think for the Christchurch shooting, that really became I became very aware of the fact that I've seen hundreds of thousands of similar posts to the ones that the perpetrator was posting. And for example, when he live streamed the shooting to Facebook, he posted all the links on 8chan. And below his post, you could see a conversation developing between some of the sympathizers or some of the users on this platform, where one of them asked, "Oh, is this a LARP or is this real?" And LARP is a live action role play. So even some of the people in that crowd couldn't really distinguish anymore between what's reality and what's actually just joking and kind of part of this culture. So that's one of the most disturbing and I think alarming developments we're seeing.
And Facebook didn't shut it down for about a half an hour. Is that right?
That really exposed some of the weaknesses that are inherent to the infrastructure and also to the business model of Facebook and some of the other platforms. But also it shows how skillful the far right has become, or extremists. Also, it's the same for the Islamists, in exactly exploiting those weak spots on the bigger social media platforms, by often setting up fake accounts, by using kind of the loopholes in the infrastructure like live streaming. We were aware of that, and the security forces were aware of that danger, that being coupled with terrorism for years, and still he was able to do that. And the same is true for his Twitter posts, where, for example, he was sharing the pictures of his guns on Twitter a couple of days before he did the shooting. But because he didn't include any text with that, he just had the guns that he would use. All the text-based algorithms couldn't spot that. So that exposes one of the problems associated with visual propaganda, where you don't use any text that can be tracked.
Yeah, it's quite scary. I was working on that story. Actually, we were commentating on it afterwards because we were both working because it went into the weekend.
Yeah.
So I work on BBC News social news team, and we have a UGC department, which are the fact finders, and they have to track down. They have to watch everything, and they have to find what's verified, what's not footage. And I actually came to my mind. I was like, God, it's quite traumatic if your job is to look at this information and obviously feedback. So you obviously look at this information, and is there something that you can do that can protect yourself from getting post-traumatic stress or anything like that?
We, even at the organization that I work for, at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, we have a lot of psychological support, but of course then there are turning points like Christchurch, where I actually felt really sick when reading the so-called manifesto. We should probably not call it a manifesto, it's really just a document that was made for journalists. But I was feeling really sick because of all the content that I had been looking at previously, and because of how real it all of a sudden became. Although we've seen terrorist attacks in the past, but that was really kind of, that exposed all the different trends that we had warned of and that we had warned the security forces of, especially when it comes to these subcultures on the internet, but also, yeah, the use of live streaming and all of these elements that seemed combined in the Christchurch attack.
Ciara, I'll move on to you. So you look at the psychology of social media, and do you look at the good and the bad?
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it. It's the sort of thing I try to take as an objective approach to these things as I possibly can, while also being an avid user of many social media platforms. But the one thing that struck me after Christchurch was that, well, everybody was going, how long did that footage remain up on Facebook before they took it down? And it's terrible that Facebook didn't take it down automatically. But the thing that I noticed around that was that a lot of, not the entire footage, but a good chunk of the footage was actually hosted on a number of mainstream news media organisations. So I think, and I could be corrected on this, but I think the Sun and the Daily Mail hosted lots of clips of it on their front page, and the Daily Mail didn't link to the manifesto board, but they actually hosted the manifesto on their own website. And you kind of think, and then the following day their front page was the Facebook terror attack. And I think, who is actually pushing the content here? Because Facebook were trying to take it down, but the Daily Mail were actually pushing it out. So there's things like that we kind of have to think about a sort of larger media ecosystem and how that works, because I think it's very easy to go, well, Facebook were wrong and all of this sort of thing. And there's certainly, when we start talking about live streaming and how they can actually nip this in the bud when something like this happens. And I think, and you probably come across this as well, there's certainly a mood abroad within certain critical scholars of social media that some of this just can't actually work. There's no way of doing it. Of how do you actually moderate live streaming? Or like, do you pre-approve people to do it? In which case then it's not the open platform that they want it to be. And I think that's going to be a pretty critical problem, and not just with live stream, but just with moderating content. Because it's we start talking about Facebook and should there be alternatives, and I always get like people saying, if we were to design a new social media platform, what would it look like? And there's always like these people get in touch with me and saying, have a look, I've designed this new social media platform, what do you think? And I said, before I even look at it, here's my question. My number one question is always, how are you going to fund the salaries and the healthcare benefits and psychological benefits for the local, not contracted, but fully paid members of staff who are going to moderate your content? Because that's going to be your biggest cost. really, is those salaries. And the bigger you get, you're going to need more of them. And most of the time, people don't have an answer for that.
Exactly, and Mark Zuckerberg is called now for government policy on a safer internet, but he didn't do that for years because he was getting lots of people on his platforms and then advertising in turn. But now he's realised that the platform is too big to manage and you can't moderate it. In your research, then with cyber psychology and online organised crime, is that kind of similar to what Julia looks at, or is it people trying to hack into your account to steal money, or what is that?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting kind of applications of this within industry, I think it's pretty much an untapped aspect of the cybersecurity industry is well, there's an awful lot of like technical procedures around, say, antivirus and firewalls and network security. There's always the remaining bit of what is actually left up to the end user, and the sort of the work that I'm doing there is sort of fighting against this assumption that, and you've probably heard this if you ever talk to anybody in cybersecurity, they'll always say the human factor is the weakest link, and I always go, well, it's not really. And if you actually talk to people by saying you're the weakest link in cybersecurity, that's sort of me saying you're all stupid. And I don't think people are stupid. And I think if you talk down to people like that, they start to go, oh well, you know, I'm stupid. I can't remember my password, and people zone out. But if you engage people in these problems and say, actually, if we want this organisation to be secure from cyber criminals, we have to get everybody involved, and everybody has to start practicing that. So, and it's basically, it's those sorts of kind of human errors that people have that are exploited by the criminals. So I'll just give you one example. If you've ever gotten one of these sort of emails from a Nigerian prince, shall we say, who's promising you a lot of money. Anybody ever gotten one of these? A lot of people nodding. And you always, anybody looked at them and gone, God, there's spelling mistakes everywhere. You notice that? You know why they put in the spelling mistakes? The reason is, if you can see the spelling mistakes, you're not going to fool for the rest of the scam. But people who can't see those, so what the guys do is they'll send them out to millions of people. They don't want it to be completely literate and completely perfect, because then too many people will reply. But if you put in lots of stupid things in it, then the person who actually replies to it, you know they're a mark. So that's how they do it. They seed in stupid things into it, so that if you fall for that, you're going to fall for anything.
So are they saying you're stupid?
Pretty much, yeah.
Darn. Aisling, thank you very much for coming over. So you, I mean, I had heard of Twitch, but I know years ago gaming was something that was kind of niche and maybe nerdy might be used to describe it. But it's actually coming into the mainstream now, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I think it's kind of entered mainstream consciousness recently when we see the explosion of games like Fortnite, but obviously it's been bubbling under the surface for a very long time now. So, for example, the games industry actually makes 3 times as much revenue as the film industry. And when I tell that to lots of people, they're kind of surprised, because lots of people kind of believe that gaming is the realm of teenage boys who kind of live in their parents' basements and playing COD and FIFA, and that's pretty much it. When you kind of, you know, unpack it and see the depth of the industry, and you really realise the artistic aspect behind it, you know, the independent scene where lots of indie devs are working, you know, doing animation and storytelling, and you really appreciate it from a kind of creative endeavour, then you can really kind of appreciate the scale. But I think it's slowly getting there in the mainstream. It's definitely lost a lot of the kind of stigma that it had, and the you know, the reputation that it had. And you know, we're seeing the explosion of esports recently in the last couple of years. It's a realm which I've very much been involved in. So seeing the explosion of these games, you know, into kind of competitions where we have prize pools of up to $25 million, you know, happening all around the world. And I think a lot of this is actually getting covered on, you know, mainstream media as well. So hopefully it's entering the public consciousness, and people are kind of aware that this is not just a fad for teenagers. It's very much a fully fledged medium, like film, like music, and people are starting to give it the kind of, yeah, the appreciation that it deserves.
Yeah, I've heard lots of teenagers saying, oh, I want to be an online gamer, or I want to be a social media influencer, and everybody's like, oh God. But like, there is money to be made from it. But is it a valid career? So I don't know if there's parents in the audience going, oh my God, they're going to come home and say that they want to do that. Should they be worried?
Honestly, this is a very interesting question, and in the first instance, I would, go for a probably no, it's not a very stable career choice. I did manage to make it a career, but that wasn't my intention. So I'm a geologist by trade, and I work 9 to 5 as a geologist in my day-to-day, and that's what I really love. But gaming has always been a passion. I kind of started when I was about 7 or 8, and it was always, something I kept up in the evenings, after school, things like that. When I was studying, I sort of managed to make what I term a jobby out of it, a job/hobby. So I kind of, entered the realm of, content creation as we know it now, and got a reasonable following from that, and was actually able to turn it into a job, which I did for a number of years. But however, I would say that I am extremely lucky. It's not something which is easily, replicated. So I really do appreciate the fact that there was a lot of luck involved with it, but I also had to put in an enormous amount of work as well, because it's such a competitive field. It's almost like, wanting to be a footballer. There are so many people that want to make it work. It takes a lot of elements to actually make it happen.
And so you essentially play games live on Twitch, and people, so you have 20,000 or so followers, is that right? Go ahead.
Yeah, on Twitch. Twitch is a live streaming platform. It's sort of similar to YouTube, except it all happens live. It's a completely 100% owned Amazon subsidiary, so it's based out of San Francisco, in the whole kind of Silicon Valley area over there. So it's really, a massive player. It's the biggest live streaming site out there, and it's probably done a fantastic job in comparison to, some of the live streaming sites you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Twitch from the get-go was live streaming. It used to be a website called Justin TV, and it was kind of people just streamed whatever they wanted to stream. And then it kind of narrowed down into just gaming, and since it's been built up from the get-go to offer these services, it's really got, all the moderation tools, and it's really well implemented. So yes, it's kind of a fully realised, well-run service.
So it's not really dark. It's not a dark social network, basically.
No, very much not. It's kind of up there after, maybe the main pillars of YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. It's definitely probably the second tier of socials that people know out there.
We'll all have to go on Twitch and set up our own accounts.
Yeah, so as I said, it's completely owned by Amazon, so it's very much fully fledged. It's not,
Yeah. Okay, very good, very good. Jane, I'll come to you. So you look after a lot of national newspapers here in Ireland, and obviously, I work in journalism, and we want to get our content out to where audiences are at, like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. But how do you find it? I mean, I'm sure you have to put your articles, up on social media. The algorithms keep changing, and kind of rules keep kind of going all over the place. How do you find it in your role as head of news?
I guess, just as my role as head of news, I would like to just maybe go back to maybe the positive aspects of social media, of which there are many, and I know you'd agree with this. For example, we can now interact and engage with our readers on an hourly basis, daily basis. Thanks to social media, I can see what stories really strike a nerve with our readers. Before social media, the advent of social media, you'd be waiting 3 or 4 days really to see an impact. You'd be waiting for the letters to come into the editor or the phone calls to be made. Now it's just so much easier for readers. So issues like housing, for example, the housing crisis, the health, that's all amplified on social media, and we can see that our readers really, really do care about those issues, and they really engage us in those issues, and that helps inform our news agenda as well. So, and then on a practical level as well, as a journalist, a working journalist, and I was in journalism before social media took off. I remember introducing my Bevo account to other journalists in news and saying, look at this, it's great. I can put pictures up and everything. But it's made a journalist's life very easy as well, because people love telling their stories, or most people are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and it means that it's just easier for us to contact people to tell their stories. So, I'm going to now talk about the not so good side of social media, but really just to say it has really transformed a journalist's working life, and for that I'm very grateful. I'd like to think people who are on Facebook, Twitter, they're also very grateful as well that they can have their voice on social media, whereas before it wasn't being heard. Everyone can say something now. Just in terms of, Facebook, Google, they'll often change their algorithms. We'll be motoring along very nicely, and then one day we'll see, God, that story isn't doing well. It's not getting any followers. What's happening? And then our digital team go off and they just say, oh, the algorithm's changed. And then that means we have to work on correcting our algorithms and SEOs for the next week. And then we're going grand again for another few months, and then the same thing happens. Or Facebook will change the rules as well. For example, sometimes they might we want proper quality news, so we're going to give that bit of volume on Facebook. And then maybe if you want to say nah, do you know what, we want news that makes people happy and sad, so we'll push that content up, and maybe the stuff coming from the media organisations will push down. So it just depends on what mood they wake up in. I don't know. So you're right, you are constantly having to monitor that. But as well, I should say that Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, it does help, and I'm sure from the BBC as well, you can't ignore them. You do need to put your stories on there in order to get people to read them. We're lucky we have this app on our site and people go to it, but really a lot of our readers, they're going through their Twitter feeds, Facebook feeds, Instagram feeds to see what's happening out there. So.
What I've noticed is so you can post obviously a lot of stories, but we don't post obviously legal or ongoing active court cases. Now we do have 50 million followers on the BBC News page, so we just can't moderate it all anyway. And we actually do have a moderation team, and they still can't moderate everything. They can't moderate everything 24/7. It's just not possible. So we have to be very careful, and I think it's just another thing to do as a journalist to watch out for people libeling, in the comment section or tweeting back or fake, putting in fake news. And do you find that that's hard to?
There's 2 points there that I want to raise. So similar to BBC, the independent newspapers, we took a decision back in 2012, very early on, not to put on any ongoing trials on our Facebook pages. Twitter, we've no problem tweeting a news story out from an ongoing trial on Twitter, but on Facebook we just couldn't, because people could be saying all sorts without knowing the full legalities of what an ongoing trial entails and ensuring that a fair trial has to take place. So we don't put it. So there's one particularly high profile court case going on at the moment. You won't see it anywhere in our Facebook page on independent.ie, our Facebook page for independent.ie, but people will still read it. So that's something that we've put up. I think other media organisations in recent years have followed a similar path as well. And then I guess the second point then is when you're talking about people being libelled in Facebook comments. So for example, for media organisations, we have to be very careful about what we publish, and that's right. We can't just go off and say so and so is an awful man altogether, and I've nothing to back it up, and I'm going to write it anyway, because we'd get sued over that. And you're right, people are entitled to their good name. There's a difference on Facebook and Twitter. People feel they can say all that kind of stuff. And if Ciara, if you were to say, for example, or she's an awful woman to get altogether, I write it up and I put it in the Irish Independent will get sued. Maybe there's a small chance Ciara will get sued, but Ciara well, I've nothing, so you're not going to get anything from me.
I don't have anything.
So we're the bigger fish. So on Facebook, for example, I think as it stands now, Facebook, the user on Facebook, the person who's been libelled or defamed, say, right, well, I'm going to take legal action against that person because my name has been defamed, my reputation's been damaged, and it's not right and it's not fair. But whereas if that person said it and it was published in the Irish Independent, that person could go after the Irish Independent for carrying those comments as well. For some reason, they can't go near Facebook. Facebook are saying, we're not a publisher, we're a platform, we're not a publisher, so it's that person, it's nothing to do with us. And I often think that maybe if there's some kind of test case taken against a social media, be it Facebook or Google or Twitter, where they are held accountable for defamatory, libelous material that's published on their platform, that, if they're hit in the pocket a little bit,
it'd be a game changer.
It could be. Maybe they might be more, they might get more on board of just moderating comments, or just saying, well, listen, we do need to please us. But then back to what Ciara was saying there, Facebook is huge. It's bigger influence than other countries. I just think it's too. I just think it's too big for Facebook themselves to moderate. Again, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know.
Ciara, do you have the answer?
All right, then here we go. I think probably the way that social media companies have been dealt with, almost academically and legally, is to kind of go, well, you have your traditional publishers like newspapers and radio and TV, your one-to-many broadcasters, and they basically just sort of said social media are many-to-many broadcasters or publishers, so everybody's publishing content to each other, and it's just too complicated for them to editorialize. And that, as far as I know, if anybody knows the e-commerce directive, I think that's more or less written into it, that they're not responsible for the content that's on it. It's the person who publishes it on it. So it's the user, and that means that the platform then is allowed to more or less stand back from it. Now that, as far as I know, is being revised as we speak, but your European Commission, is Marie McGuinness in yet? We'll ask her that later on. I think there is, but the thing is, and I've made this point to a number of people over the course of the weekend, is that sort of treating people like mini content producers works to an extent if you're an influencer and you're like that's what I think Facebook was originally designed for, is for people selling themselves and selling their product. But for the vast majority of us, I would say that's not how we use it. We're not thinking about publishing when we eat a breakfast or whatever. So I think we have to start actually dealing with these platforms in a different way, because I think they've become an awful lot more involved in your daily life than like if you were blogging and you're typing up your piece and then you push send and it goes up on your blog like it would have been maybe a decade ago. Now it's much more ingrained in your daily life. It's much more emotional. It's much more psychological. So I take your point. I don't think it's really appropriate that we think of these things as that, and I think that means that the likes of Facebook have to be regulated in a different way. Now the problem with this is that the situation we have now, just to go to the title of our panel, the future of social media, I think, and it reminded me when you mentioned Bebo there, Bebo is long gone. Well, it's come back, but it's more or less dead. And if you were to look at, and I was looking at this as I was writing the book, which is in all good bookstores now. You're all welcome to the launch event on the 8th of May in Huddersfield.
In Dublin, is it?
Yeah, Huddersfield, Dublin. Wednesday, 8th of May, 6 o'clock. There'll be wine. One of the things I came across was that about maybe 10 years ago, pretty much every European country had their own little social networking platform. So there was Friends Reunited in the UK, there was 20 in Spain, there was StudyViz in Germany, there was High Five in Holland, there was GrowNet in Poland. There was tons of them. They're all dead, they're all gone, they're all buried. Which means that at the moment there is, and this must be fairly problematic for news organisations, because you're now basically at the behest of Facebook. Facebook changed your algorithm, you go down. You've nowhere else to go really. I mean, I think one of the things that concerned me most was lots of social media in the news last year, but the one that really sort of scared me was when Google shut down Google+. And like, everybody thought it was funny, but I was like, if Google can't make this work, who can? So then it's just Facebook and it's Twitter, and there's a few other ones, but it means that, like, certainly in the West now, there's a lot more things going on in China and the Far East, but in the West now, we're stuck with Facebook. And that means that if you design your regulations so that Facebook can work them, Facebook is going to decide what the regulations are and then we follow them. That means it's going to be increasingly hard then for the smaller platforms to come in, or the ones like the Gab and the other ones which are left outside of the loop to do whatever they like. So I think there's going to be a pretty difficult conversation for policymakers and regulators about how we actually make this a little bit easier.
I had another point which I just wanted to make, is that these platforms that we use, they are essentially businesses. So a lot of the time, the content that goes out, they actually want things that will generate comments and engagement, whether that's good or bad, because they're working on, having people stay on their site because that's how they make money. So essentially we have to understand that these platforms aren't a public service. They are there to make money. We see it with Facebook, everyone gets annoyed with the amount of adverts that show up in your feed, but that is their business model. Like that's how they operate. And another issue is, talking about trying to moderate these platforms, is that these companies essentially work internationally. So how are you going to, be able to target somebody who's publishing in Germany, or if somebody's publishing in the US? They're working in very different, policies. So if we're, looking at the publisher as the individual, then that's going to be a different policy for every single person who's publishing. And if there was a top-down moderation from Facebook, then that opens the whole can of worms with people saying, there's censorship. And if someone's moderating your views, you'll take that very personally. But if they're moderating somebody's views who you don't agree with, then you'll think that's correct. So it comes into a larger question of kind of ethics and morality, which is, very much varies from culture to culture.
Yeah, to jump in here, I completely agree that those 2 points that you made, those are really, I think, at the core of the problems that we're facing, or the challenges, especially when it comes to the international dimension of social media. It's, for example, in the UK, when the group National Action was banned, the first far-right terrorist group to be banned, all their propaganda and content was removed from, or blocked on Twitter actually, in the UK. With ISIS, that was a different scenario, because that's ISIS is considered an international terrorist organization, so it was actually removed worldwide. But when it came to national legislation, for example, against hate speech, that would be taken down on a local or national level, and then people would still be able to access it from other countries using a VPN, or even just being in a different country. They would still have access to the blocked Twitter, or the accounts and the content that was blocked in the UK, but still available from that terrorist organization. And likewise, the business models, that's one of the things we're really struggling with, because we've done lots of experiments, for example, on YouTube, starting with normal content, but it's just within a matter of 24 hours, you almost inevitably end up in quite an extreme echo chamber. For example, even if you start with, that really says a lot about the algorithm and how it works and what the business model is like. If you start with a video about running or jogging, you're very likely to end up in an extreme sport kind of YouTube channel. If you start with vegetarian cooking recipes, you're quite likely to end up in a vegan militant kind of echo chamber. And the same applies to extremist content. So if you start with a normal Trump rally video, however, you can say how extreme you think Trump is, but you're very likely within 24 hours or 48 hours to end up in a white supremacist echo chamber.
Why is that? Why is that? Is YouTube not looking at this content saying that's too extreme, it shouldn't be up there? And why is the algorithm pushing this extreme, why is that?
Yeah, mostly because the people who train the algorithms, it's exactly what you said, because the business model is based on the key performance indicator of YouTube or of Google is the time that users spend on the platforms, just like with Facebook, and they want to maximize that time because that's how they make money. And the people who spend most of the time on these platforms, unfortunately, tend to be lunatics. It's just, that's the
Call
way
it
it
out.
is. So those are the people who train the algorithms for us, for all of the content that we're then recommended. So they're conspiracy theorists, addicted people, extremists. They're the ones that spend most of the time on the platform. So that's the people who would
So
be behind.
just quickly saying that a lot of these algorithms aren't created by one person sat in an office saying this is the algorithm. A lot of it can be, as we talked about, the trends saying it might prioritize something, but broadly they'll look at what users do and work on that. So it's not looking, it's not like someone's choosing to send you more and more extreme videos. The machine just kind of sees that people tend to go down these rabbit holes, and that's what leads to them spending longer on the site. So it's not any person making these nefarious trends, it's just them analysing human behaviour and what we do.
Which is really depressing, actually.
And also it says a lot about human nature as well. It's not just people that are spending most of the time tend to be quite extreme, but also, of course, we're drawn to extreme content, and we're kind of, that's in the human psyche. I assume that you've been studying that as well, but that dimension of that we do quite like to be redirected to videos that get more and more exciting and extreme in a sense.
Well, actually, you're on psychologist. Is it because our brain wants to get those endorphins and get more and more extreme content, or?
It's well, I think there's a number of things here that are kind of related. I think when we're talking about the recommender systems that work on YouTube, I think is very similar to what you're getting on your Facebook newsfeed. And there was something I came across as well, that when the newsfeed came onto Facebook first, if you cast your mind back to what Facebook was like in 2006, this is the other thing we forget, that all of these platforms seem so new, but actually most of them have been around for 15 years now, so we should really have this solved by now. But the controversy at the time when the Facebook newsfeed came in was that it actually just combined information that was already there. It didn't expose any information. All of the information that was combined on the newsfeed was already on everybody else's profile. So when you went onto Facebook to find out what your friends were doing, you actually had to go to their profile page. It wasn't all gathered there in your newsfeed. And so Facebook just said, look, we haven't like dumped your information. You already had that information out there. But people didn't like that because essentially they could have hidden fairly well because there was a certain amount of obscurity there. And what happened then was that Facebook said, we're just showing you what we think you want to see. And what you're getting now, and people are like, I'm one of the people who still uses, or I try to still use everything in chronological order because I like to be old-fashioned. But every social media platform now has these newsfeed algorithms where they push things up to the top that they think you're most likely to want to see. And what this actually does now, and how I think it feeds into the YouTube algorithms going Nazi basically, is that what it rewards, and the way our societies have tended to work, is that you don't speed on the road because you assume that there's going to be a guard will catch you. You assume that you're being watched. You don't break into places because you assume you'll be seen and you'll be caught. But the way the social media platforms is they do the opposite, is they threaten you with invisibility. So that if you don't post anything, nobody will contact you. If you don't post something that people will put lots of likes on, you're not going to be seen. So it rewards you for being more visible, and you don't count as a person unless you put something up there that gets lots of likes. And that's how people start to think, and you kind of build a certain amount of relationship and how you feel based on how your content does. And so what this means, and like the thing is, they didn't really think this through when they put these things in. They try to sort of, if content is liked by, somebody that you're closely related to, we'll push that up. If it's somebody that's far away from you, we'll push that down. If it's more recent, it goes up. But it basically means then that you're getting a rich get richer sort of thing. It will show you stuff at the top that has lots of likes, and then you realise that's giving you an implicit message. To work on this platform, to be sociable, you have to do things that get lots of likes. You never see anything at the top of your page that has 0 likes. No. So that's how it actually feeds into it, and that's how it rewards you.
Yeah, but that's scary because you miss out on weddings, engagements, pregnancies, because obviously everybody updates their own feed, and then you're like, how did I not know about that? Because Facebook decided to not tell me about it,
And it also means that both non-state and state actors, malign actors online, can trick and game these algorithms and can make use of exactly those mechanisms to push their content higher up. And that's where all the disinformation campaigns, or what's at the heart of those, that are then coordinated sometimes in those dark social channels, but then carried into the mainstream and can actually influence opinions, can shape voting behavior and things like that.
So they're the ones that are taking time out. We've all got jobs to do, and they're the ones that have loads of time to figure out how to beat the system. Yeah.
I think just to go back to a point that Julia made earlier, I think Kieran made it in as well. So some of the Facebook, Twitter and Insta, they're all very mainstream platforms now, and they will take down extreme content and they will moderate and remove and rightly remove. But then it's almost like a game of whack-a-mole, because there's always a way that this content will come out, whether it be on other lesser social media platforms that people within that group or those followers will know about. So Facebook might remove this content, but it will pop up somewhere else, and it brings and pops up on an app or a social media platform I never heard of, and that brings me on to my next point. I'm often going to my 13-year-old nephew because he has more knowledge of social media. These people here are experts, I'm not. But he has more knowledge than I do of social media. And like, I remember one time he was showing me this new video platform, and by that time I got the hang of it. He's like, oh sure, I'll finish with that, like we've moved on to the next one. And he's on Instagram, and I follow his Instagram account, but I know that's not his real Instagram account. I know he has another Instagram account which he believes that myself and his mother know nothing about. I know it's in existence, I cannot find it. And my friends, a lot of them who are parents of teenagers, they also know as well. There's the official parent-friendly Instagram account, but I know she's another 2 or 3 accounts out there somewhere, and I can't find them.
Is he on TikTok?
He's on everything. I actually think he curates the news himself as to what he's on. Because he made the mistake one time, I'm on this thing called Uber, so I straight away onto Uber thinking, I'll get down with the kids, it's fine. And then he was like, oh, I'm away from that now. So he is very careful about what he tells us.
Well, that's funny because,
Yeah.
you know...
But he's an expert, as are all teenagers.
Yeah.
They're running...
Yeah,
things around.
and
It's
the
like,
BBC
no
News
idea.
were trying to get, you know, with the programme, and then we hear, oh, good, there's TikTok, so we've been looking at TikTok, but sure, that's for teenagers, like actually quite young, 12, well, is it 13 years of age that you should be on TikTok?
13, 14. I'm actually
Yeah.
surprised that Instagram have really tapped into that, but again, when he set up an Instagram account, I think his mother was following that, and that was it, you know, and then all his friends were like, oh,
Well, you
here,
do on
you know.
your ma on
You don't want
your
ma.
social.
Oh my god, my ma's have to comment on my picture.
This is a question here in the audience.
Yeah, sorry. I'm a social media coordinator for teaching Caher, and what we're kind of finding at the moment, or what we're seeing around the world, even as being like I'm in my 20s, I'm really seeing people my age and people we're interacting with, they're getting so disillusioned with social media. And I know lots of people in their 20s and their young 30s, they've just gotten rid of it. They've gotten rid of the apps. They don't want it. Like, is that a trend that you're seeing, or is that a small minority? Like, are people pulling away from social media?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely a trend that we're seeing. I think there's also a problem with those generational gaps and the differences that we're seeing, because now we're seeing those young people who are getting increasingly social media savvy, and actually on the negative side are often drawn into these subcultures then. And for example, especially the gaming community has become also partly kind of even a radicalization hotbed in some of the subcultures. But then, yeah, people, the millennials and people of, in their 20s are increasingly getting off social media. Whereas, for example, for some of the conspiracy theory communities on Facebook, we see that the average age is 40 plus. And then there's also the additional generational gap between the people who are higher up in the security or intelligence community are actually not really that aware of all the dynamics and the newest platforms. They wouldn't often, sometimes they're surprised when we talk to them about new platforms that are used by extremists to manipulate people or radicalize people. So then the younger generations would be the ones that would actually be more aware of that, and our generation, or the 20s, 30s, people in their 30s would actually rather prefer not to be on social media anymore. So there are all these different generational gaps, which I think pose a lot of problems also in dealing with the challenges.
I might just bring in Aisling. So, I mean, do you find that, are your community on Twitch, are they on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram and all that?
I think it's exactly as you described. It's very much a almost trend thing for the generation. So, for example, everybody my age is no longer on Facebook because there's no reason to be on Facebook. You can be on, Instagram or Twitter, and it's just a trend, I would say. My parents' generation love Facebook. They think it's fantastic, and they can, connect with all the family around the world, and they think it's great. But for people my age, it just kind of doesn't suit our purposes anymore, I guess. So, people are moving to Instagram because they want to share photos of when they're traveling, or Twitter because, it's so much easier to just share what you're doing live. So I don't think people are moving away from social media necessarily, as we, talked about. The younger generations are all over these new platforms. I think it's just very much a trend thing, and people at various stages in their lives are picking the platform that kind of suits their needs at the current time.
there was an article I was reading in The Guardian just before I came down, and I think the article said, I think it was by 2043, I'm not too sure of the year, but they said that Facebook are going to have a big problem and that most of their members will be dead by then. They're going to have more Facebook pages by deceased members than they will have from live members. That's from people my age. So I'm 39, so kind of I have noticed women my age, including my sister, the mother of the 13-year-old boy, and she's like, I just have to take a break from Facebook, and she'll switch it off for 2 weeks, and she's got like it's not mute, she's actually just turned it off because she's like, I'm just getting too sucked in. And I've noticed that my other friends, they choose not to engage with Facebook for a few weeks. Some of them will switch it off, or they'll just put the phone away because they just think it's just too much. Now the 13-year-old nephew made a decision there 4 weeks ago to actually join Facebook. He went to his mother and he thought about it. He told me he'd been thinking about it, and this is a big step for him. He wanted to go, so she spoke to him about Facebook, but I was quite surprised. Like, we were like, why would you want to go on Facebook? But he says, no, I do. Now, he probably has a parent-friendly account on Facebook and another Facebook account we will never know about because it'll be well hidden, and that'll be his real Facebook. And that's what my sister had to sit down and talk to him about. Because, you know, on Instagram, I think it's more, I could be wrong, there's a perception out there that it's safer, whereas Facebook, it's, you know, you do need to be careful. So, but, you know, with the gaming, like, again, I'm completely ignorant to this because I'm not a gamer, but he's really into gaming, and I'd argue that he probably spends more time on his gaming and the gaming community than he does on social media, and I think that will probably figure more as he gets older.
I'd say, I mean, I could talk about this subject for ages, but I think the actual stem of it is from a very, very similar place. People who love, you know, social media, the gamers, we kind of get the same kick out of it if you're, you know, using it in the same way. So, you know, games are often in the news for all various sorts of reasons. I think recently gaming addiction has kind of been, you know, at the forefront, but really trying to understand the sort of psychology that happens. It's, you know, it's another social outlet for people. They get the same kind of, you know, the hormones, the dopamine kicks when they're speaking to friends and they have this social group online. You know, they're able to acquire status and kind of, you know, individual personality, and lots of people derive a lot of happiness from this, which they may not get from their day-to-day lives. So it's very similar to social media in the way that it actually functions chemically in our brains. You know, we get the same kind of kicks out of it.
Would you say that's more part of the culture that is formed, or also of the gamification of everything? And because, yeah, and the second question that I'd be really interested in on a personal level, how is it as a woman, especially as a public-facing woman in the gaming space, especially after controversies like a few years ago with the Gamergate controversy and all that hatred, that misogynist hatred against female gaming journalists, and what is it like as a woman?
Yeah, so to start off with the first question about the gamification of social media, I think that's just another tactic. I mean, the term gamification is just, yeah, it's basically trying to instill an addictiveness to these platforms. So it's, yeah, it's very similar to what games try to do. It's all about trying to keep people engaged, keep them on the site as long as you possibly can. Things such as, you know, the kind of feeling, if you've been on social media any length, you know the feeling of when you have a notification pop up on your phone and you're in a social situation and you're trying not to think about it, but you really want to check it, but you know you shouldn't. And that kind of, you know, stimuli, that's what they're going for. And it's, yeah, very much the same as in gaming. But to your point of what's it like being a woman in this industry, it's very interesting because honestly, the actual gaming market is pretty equal in terms of women and men. Both game, but they play very different sorts of games. So we see that, you know, genres such as FPS, which are, you know, shooter games, games like Call of Duty, things like CSGO, which you may have heard of. They're obviously very heavily dominated by men. There's still women that play them, but we see, you know, women play more kind of RPG, story-based games, things like that. So yeah, there is a divide there, and the way that it kind of transpires is that in the world of esports, the part that's really taking off at the moment and where I had most involvement, that's mostly in these very competitive games which are heavily dominated by men. Personally, I kind of always grew up just with an interest in hobbies which have been very male dominated. So in my day job, I'm a geologist, and in my company, I'm the only woman in the office. But that doesn't really occur to me because I'm just there to get on with the job. But yeah, I was actually speaking to Niamh, who was on the panel yesterday, who's a geneticist at UCD, and she was saying it's the exact same. She just doesn't notice it on a daily basis. However, when you're in the kind of online space and you have so much interaction, you definitely do, you do notice it. Whether that's in a good way or a bad way, it's kind of a double-edged sword, I would say. I've definitely had my fair share of criticism, but it's never been about my talent. It's always been people who just don't like the fact that I'm a woman or feel like they need to voice their opinions about that. But
what do you do in those cases? Do you fight back or do you ignore it?
well, it kind of depends how I'm feeling on the day, to be honest. I'm very confident in myself and my abilities when I work in this space. I've been a host of live events around the world, hosting for sports competitions. I've been on YouTube and TV shows as well, and I know that I'm the one hosting the show and they're the ones at home tweeting on the internet, so it's very easy for me to not be affected by these things. They don't know me personally, they don't know anything about me, and normally they're just trying to vent their own frustrations at somebody that they don't know. So I
Keyboard warriors.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very much able to chalk it up to I'm probably in a much better state, both in terms of what I'm actually doing and mentally than those people. So it's quite easy to write it off, but it definitely occurs.
Yeah, it's a good question. Ciaran, just in terms of young people on Instagram, BBC News did an investigation about teenagers and self-harm and the hashtags that they're using. And one young girl, she was a teenager, she took her own life, and she had spent hours and hours uploading photographs to these groups that are on Instagram. And he went to Instagram to tell them. They really didn't take it seriously until the BBC put it across every single platform. And then they said, they first, said, yeah, it's not our business to do that. And now they've said that they'd take down content and they'd watch closely and all that. How, you obviously are a psychologist, you've seen it. I mean, it's you can't blame Instagram because, they didn't kill her, this young girl, but how much responsibility do they have, and how are these, have you looked into the areas that these teenagers are going into about, eating disorders or self-harm?
Yeah, it's a very interesting and complex topic. I think the linking around use of social media and mental health is an exceptionally complex and difficult area at the moment, because it's something that everybody feels very closely involved with, no matter what angle you're taking. The one thing I would say is that there is a pretty poor evidence basis in nearly all of this. We don't really have very much good, even though I would say there was probably in a region of about 1,000 to 1,200 peer-reviewed scientific research articles published every year on social media and some aspect of psychology, about 1,000. But most of those papers are, I would say probably about 60-70% of them are correlational, so they're surveys. It doesn't tell you what caused what. Is certainly suicidality, while I wouldn't be an expert on it, I could say with some degree of confidence that it's very hard to nail any suicide event down to any one particular factor. So the idea that Instagram use caused a suicide, I would be extremely careful about touching. I think that case was certainly tragic. I think the BBC did great work in bringing that to light, and I think Instagram, I obviously sympathise with the family, but I also sympathise with that Instagram somehow was kind of blamed in that, and I'm not entirely sure how that would even methodologically transpire. I also think as well, there's certainly a good amount of research on self-harm material on Instagram, and it's very tricky, because there are if it's simply around the imagery, it's the amount of work that they have to do to actually catch all of that content to automatically take it down. And it's this sort of thing, if that kind of content is automatically removed, you're going to get false positives and false negatives. So stuff is going to be taken down that isn't really, and there is, I would say, probably roughly every 18 months there's going to be an outcry on Facebook somewhere in the world because a woman put up a photograph of herself breastfeeding and it was taken down. And that happens the whole time. And it's simply because a content moderator somewhere in the world saw it and just went delete. And that's going to happen with self-harm content because somebody somewhere will have to see it and go, is that self-harm? And they've probably got 1,000 pictures to do per day. And it'll take down false positive. So some of that content will remain up and some of it will take down. The other aspect to this as well, though, that is that makes it even more complicated is that there is some research that would suggest that while there is certainly our communities everywhere online which will try and the sort of pro-ana content, so it's glorifying anorexia. There's certainly some of that out there, and that's what parents are worried about. My child go on Instagram, they're already body conscious, and somebody all on there will encourage them to starve themselves. But what the research actually shows that while that certainly does happen in some cases, there are also places where sufferers of anorexia use Instagram to self-support. So they encourage each other to deal with their problem. Now, if you've got a very heavy filter on Instagram to take down this content, then you're going to knock that out. And which means that your extremely vulnerable teenager who's using Instagram to get support from their friends, because if you think about it, if you're a teenager somewhere and you have this eating disorder, what is the likelihood that you know somebody else who's going through the same thing? It's probably you probably don't know anybody in your own school. So you go online and you try and find somebody who's dealing with the same problem, and you're likely to find them on Instagram. So it's incredibly complicated, and I think what this actually comes back to again is how we actually regulate these platforms, not from the point of view of content, but more from the point of view of the individual and the individual's psychological and emotional needs. And that's not going to be solved anytime soon.
And it also shows that it's a cross-platform, or it requires a cross-platform response, because otherwise they would find another outlet or another way of connecting with those people on some of the alternative message boards.
It might go even darker. I was just thinking there, wasn't it the Momo challenge that went viral? Everyone's putting his eyes. We were getting lots of comments from parents saying they were really worried about it because their children were coming home from school, and it turned into a frenzy, and then it turned out that it was a hoax, and then there was people questioning whether it was a hoax at all, and it was all a bit blurred. That was quite scary for parents, because if they're not on their teenagers, or I know children shouldn't be on these platforms, but where did that end up? Do you know?
I got phone calls about this. I was asked to go on Primetime. Anybody here is on Primetime?
Yay! Great programme.
A fantastic programme. Great host. But I remember, because it was that week, and it started on the Monday, I think, and I remember getting the phone call, I think it was on the Wednesday. And by this stage, I'd seen this whole thing being developed, being pushed, and people getting straight on the airways and talking about how this was a big scary thing that was happening, and where I was going, actually, you know what, pretty sure there's nothing here. Has there been a case of any self-harm to do with this anywhere in Ireland or in the UK? No, I don't think there has been. I'm pretty sure there hasn't. And by the Tuesday I said, this, we have to stop talking about this because it's actually going to be worse. So when I did get the call from Primetime, I said, look, I can't, I've got childcare duties this evening, so I can't anyway, but I'm not going to talk about this because I think we're over-egging it. And researchers very kindly took my point, but I do believe actually Mark Smith from the Psychological Society went on and was really good on it. He more or less made the same point, but it's something that we have to kind of be careful, and it's not just with Momo Challenge, but it's also with understanding how these algorithms work as well, and what they're actually rewarding, because, and it's a point that I often make when people are talking about conspiracy theorists and far-right activists on Twitter, and they say, oh, such and such a person, does the phrase investigative journalist mean anything to anybody? It's a sort of a a subtext for a certain person in Ireland who is now pushing an awful lot of crazy theories on YouTube. And I'm not going to mention their name because I don't want to give them any more attention than they deserve. And this is something that it's actually an old gaming phrase, the only winning move is not to play. And we have to be careful about what we talk about and what we don't talk about. And sometimes there are things that we simply just shouldn't give any attention to because it only makes it worse, it only encourages them. And that's a learning, I think, that I think younger people are finding it possibly easier, but most people in general I think are finding it quite difficult. There's some things you're just not going to talk about because it's only going to make it worse. And I think the Momo challenge was, I could see, but the thing that the things that I was hearing about it was that there was one primary school, it was a primary school or secondary school somewhere in Ireland, that the kids came home with a 3-page letter from the headmaster. And like, it hadn't happened anywhere but wherever he got it, and then the kids hadn't heard about it until they got it from them, and then it comes home to the parents, and then the parents freak out. And so it all sort of snowballed. And where
There's mass hysteria across the world.
The PSNI actually issued a statement about the Momo challenge, and that's actually what really increased the exposure here, because we were saying, oh my god, the police service in Northern Ireland have issued it. It was actually quite a lengthy statement, and it told us how it happened and what to do, and urged parents to speak to their children. And it's just like, you know, like if a police force is talking about this, then of course parents and children and everywhere are like, of course they're going to take it very, very seriously, and of course it's going to be discussed. But it was just when that statement came out, it was a very, very detailed statement, and they did say, in fairness, at the outset, we're aware of these media reports, that we're not aware of it happening in UK and Ireland, but if you are affected by the Momo challenge, please contact the PSNI. And I had a very lengthy statement as to what happens, how it came about. And I think, in fairness to PSNI, they probably issued that statement due to calls and fear that they were coming across as well. It's just, I guess, just that appeal from the PSNI did legitimise the Momo challenge, because we're thinking, well, if they're issuing a statement about it, it must be a real thing.
Yeah, because in our editorial meeting, somebody had brought it up, and this is when we didn't realise it was a hoax. And I said, let's not do a story on it, because we're only giving it, oxygen. And then it, picked up and picked up and picked up. And then we came back to it and we said, okay, I think we will write an article about that. It is a hoax, because a lot of the BBC managers had agreed on that. But even doing that, was giving it oxygen, but at least you were putting things into context and giving people information,
A question about that, about the investigative journalist. In Ireland, I think at the moment, there are two things happening simultaneously on Twitter that I am aware of. With regard to politics, and those are that there is a fear, and perfectly justifiable fear, I think, that there are pressures. I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm so used to shouting. That there are pressures coming from abroad, coming in at us via social media, which are going to affect our politics, and they may be driven by bad people in other countries. And we are aware of that, and we are concerned about it. And then we see essentially far-right agenda, very recognisable in terms of graphics and in terms of what is being said, being pushed via individuals within our society. And I think one of the dilemmas that a lot of people have, particularly in my generation, maybe younger people don't have it, is a conflict between a sense of responsibility and a sense of helplessness. Is it the right thing to be making really clear that we don't support the sorts of things that we see coming at us, and we maybe feel we're more aware than other people are about where they're coming from and how dangerous they are? Or is it better to say, I'm not going there? And if you say I'm not going there out loud, as opposed to just ignoring it, you're actually part of the conversation. The numbers of tweets that come on saying, do not retweet her, remember not to. Screenshots, not retweets. Well, I personally don't actually know what the answer is. I suspect it is shut up. But you are always afraid that you are the person who didn't stand up. You are the person who, saw the books being burned and stood at the back of the crowd. What's the answer?
I'd say it's a really tricky one. We think a lot about how we engage or are not engage with extremist content online, and especially with these coordinated campaigns that seek for attention, that game the attention economy. But I think it's very similar to the responses, the very nuanced responses required in content moderation, where sometimes the claims or the campaigns are absurd enough to completely ignore them. But in some of the cases where, for example, pieces of disinformation require debunking, require, for example, fact-checking because it's not clear otherwise to the public, is that real or is it not, or for hoaxes. I think there's a really important role there for different members of civil society, but also obviously for journalists, and also for people working in the education sector, really shielding young people from buying into that. And when it comes to coordinated hate campaigns, or for example, we're seeing lots of coordinated trolling campaigns against politicians, but also against journalists. I think in this case it's really important to show digital civil courage, and for everyone to kind of to stand up to that and to jump in, because otherwise you often, as the individual targeted, and I've been in that situation a lot of times myself after writing, and I think especially journalists but also politicians and even artists and activists get more and more exposed to becoming the target of such a mass coordinated hate campaign. In that case, it's so helpful to actually have people backing you and standing up, even if it's online, even if it's anonymously, because it just pushes back against the extremes.
Yeah, I get your point as well, because you know the group incels, these are the subculture of men who hate women and pretty horrendous. But I remember the BBC, we did an article about who are the incels, what are they, and whatever. And I went to a conference in Texas, Austin, Texas, and the person speaking was saying, you shouldn't give these idiots like any platform. You shouldn't give them, don't even talk about them, But the thing is that they were getting more notoriety, and one of the incels killed lots of people in one of the schools in the US. So it's a really hard balance. Like, do you totally ignore it, like you said, or do you say, I know what they are, but we're taking the decision that we're not going to talk about it, but then you're talking about it. So it's really tricky for journalists, and I think we have to take it case by case. It was the same with the Islamic State, and we in the BBC called it the so-called Islamic State. And I was working for BBC World TV at the time, and it was only kicking off the Syria conflict, and we were like, oh, will we bother, mentioning them? And then it started getting more prevalence, so we did a map about where did they come from, where were they located, and so then they became obviously so famous. And now I take the decision that with the what was the latest attack? Oh, Sri Lanka. They said, oh, the so-called Islamic State did it, and the teams. I said, do not break that news that they did it, because they were coming out about everything. Any attack that was happening anywhere in the world, it was the Islamic State that they, one loner, that would do it. But then they were saying it was us, and I was like, do not put it on breaking news that it's them, because they want that. They want the notoriety. They want it. And one of my team said, oh, okay, well, we won't put it on the BBC Breaking Twitter account, but can we put it on the BBC World? And I was like, no, you're not putting it on anywhere. They've done enough damage, and so but it goes back to just one person making that decision as well. It's quite hard. I think it's quite hard to come up with a defined answer.
There's a really groundbreaking report that was released, I think, a year ago by Whitney Phillips in the US, who works for the Data and Society Institute. It's called The Oxygen of Amplification, and kind of gives actually recommendations also to journalists on how to deal with these tricky topics. And also, it's also about how the US media made a huge mistake in their way of covering trolling in the run-up to the US election and the alt-right, and how they gave them so much more of a voice than they would have otherwise had. But it's the same for amplifying terrorist attacks, as you said, and mentioning the names or glorifying the attacker by posting pictures. That is something that can inspire copycat attacks. And we've had exactly that in the 2016 summer, when we had the wave of attacks that were all inspired by the same kind of media attention, that they were partly also kind of motivated by their knowledge that they would get this wave of media attention.
So we've run out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much for your questions. Your interaction was brilliant. Thank you so much to my amazing panel, Julia Ebner, Research Fellow at the London-based Institute for Strategic Dialogue, Dr. Ciara McMahon, Information Security Consultant and award-winning academic psychologist, author of The Psychology of Social Media, which is in shops now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Aisling Ryan, thank you so much for coming over from the UK, gaming extraordinaire and geologist. And lovely Jane Last, Head of News at Independent News and Media. Thank you very much.